Today we hit 25,000 subscribers on YouTube. Thank you. Grossi Posse Packer Nation, welcome to an episode of Packcast, the podcast where you're a Packers fan, but it sure does help. I am your host, Tom Grossi, and today we are going to start the first iteration of a title that took me way too long to figure out and is probably stolen from something else, but we're going to look at Week 1 Fantasy Studs and Duds. TM. How this is going to go is when the fantasy season is actually underway, I'll be breaking down what's going on in both of the Packcast leagues, which are the Patreon leagues, each week, and kind of where things have gone terribly, terribly wrong, because they will. And we'll also take a look at 3 studs, 3 players that will definitely need to be played this week, and then 3 potential duds, and then maybe a sleeper or 2 as well. And so the guys that I'm going to pick on here are obviously not like Alvin Kamara or Saquon Barkley. You should be playing those people every week. And each week, I think I'm just going to make it better. Obviously, I wanted to start off with the thumbnail being the absolute greatest quarterback of all time, Nathan Peterman, who is, even though he's on IR, he's still going to kill it this season. I just believe. Even if he's not designated to return, I think he's still going to come and cause havoc this year. So let's take a look at who you should be starting for Week 1 Fantasy. So my first stud, this guy has broken my heart years ago, but recently has become one of the more healthier wide receivers after plagues of injury problems and not being able to finish the season. Chargers wide receiver Keenan freaking Allen. He's going up against the Colts this week, who obviously suffered from the loss of Andrew Luck retiring a couple weeks ago. But looking at the Colts defense, obviously you have guys like Rocky Sin who have been brought in there, but I think that the Chargers are absolutely going to rip apart the Colts, and the big part of that is going to be their air attack. Now, Melvin Gordon is most likely not going to show up before Sunday, and so Phillip Rivers is going to rely on backup running backs as well as that air attack. So, that being said, I think Keenan Allen has a great potential for points, and if you are in a PPR league and you could trade for Keenan Allen, do it. Then moving on to a running back here, I'm going to go with Mark Ingram, the Baltimore Ravens running back versus the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins were 31st in the league against rushing last year, and it hasn't really gotten too much better, obviously losing guys like Cameron Wake, and so I think that Mark Ingram is going to be a stud this season, considering the Ravens are just going to be handing the ball off to him all of the time, and I think Mark Ingram is due for a big Week 1, considering how weak that defensive line of Miami is, so I see Mark Ingram just going off on them. Then moving on to this is a little bit of a riskier pick, but I'm going to go with the Seahawks defense here against Cincinnati Week 1. Cincinnati obviously struggling for the fact that they do not have their star wide receiver A.J. Green for a few weeks, and to be completely honest, the Bengals just don't really impress me a whole lot. I just don't know what's going on with their team. They just seem like a team that is perpetually on a treadmill that is just going like 1 mile an hour, but then going backwards 1 mile an hour. So they're actually not going anywhere. But the Seahawks defense, especially with the addition of Clowney and still keeping guys like Bobby Wagner, I think could have a pretty damn good game and should score at least about 10 points for you. Then a potential sleeper. Obviously, this guy usually went within the top 15, but not a whole lot of talk is being made about him, and that is Cleveland running back Nick Chubb for the Browns, going against the Tennessee defense, which was 19th in rushing defense last year. But Nick Chubb, I think, is going to be due for a big game. A lot of what's being talked about, of course, is Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham and all those weapons that they have in the air attack. But I think Nick Chubb has a good chance here of getting some points. I think he could potentially be a really great player this year. I know I picked him up in a couple of leagues. I also picked up Kareem Hunt just in case he wasn't a good player. But if you are having any contemplations of starting Nick Chubb, you definitely should. Then moving on to duds, guys that most likely are not going to have a good Week 1. We got LaShawn McCoy versus the Jaguars. The Jaguars were 20th in rushing defense, which you're like, oh, that's pretty good. But the problem is that LaShawn McCoy is already going to be in a crowded Chiefs backfield, and I don't really trust him just yet to be getting to get lots of points here. Considering that backfield is kind of a mess right now, there's 3 potential guys that are going to be vying for carries. And so right now, they're going to kind of utilize a carrying by committee thing, but I see Damian Williams most likely taking a majority of those snaps, so I won't feel comfortable enough throwing LaShawn McCoy in there. If he does well week 1, then maybe you throw him in week 2. Then moving on, and this one hurts me. It really does, and I hope he proves me wrong, but Aaron Jones versus the Chicago defense. The Chicago defense last year was the #1 rushing defense, allowing the fewest amount of rushing yards, and so Aaron Jones has a big task ahead of him. Now, he may be able to sneak in from the goal line, wind up getting a couple yards, but I think if we're going to beat the Bears, we're going to have to do it through the air. Now, again, Aaron Jones might have a respectable game, maybe have something like 10 points, but I would be a little cautious. If you have someone else you can throw in there, anyone going against the Bears' running defenses is usually not going to be too good. Then finally, moving on to another running back. We got 3 running backs in the potential dud category this week. We got Duke Johnson Jr. versus the underrated and stealthily good Saints defense. Now, obviously, Lamar Miller tearing his leg off and not being able to play for this year. But Duke Johnson Jr., obviously he's going to get a bulk of the carries. He's not bad in PPR, but the Saints had the #2 rushing defense last year. So don't be surprised if they wind up keeping Duke Johnson Jr. in check. I feel like you're going to see a lot of Deshaun Watson. You'll see a lot of DeAndre Hopkins, but I'm not really too sure and too confident in starting Duke Johnson Jr. In the first week here. So that's what I got for your studs and your duds, and we'll obviously go a little bit more in depth next week when we actually have a week of fantasy in the book. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. How did you do in your fantasy draft? And we'll see. We'll see what happens in week 1. I'm just happy that we're playing football again. So I checked my draft results, and I think the best league said that I was going to win 3 games. So that's just a disclaimer, just in case you think about listening to me. It might not work out. But you can always find me at TomGrossiComedy.com or at TomGrossiComedy on all social media. See down below. Check out podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play Music, Spotify, and of course here on YouTube. And check out patreon.com/TomGrossiComedy. And thank you to all the Patreon members who are already over there. We released an interview today with Josh from the Sports Fury, who is a diehard Bears fan, breaking down the Week 1 matchup between the Bears and the Packers, so go and check that out. I'll also be releasing clips throughout the day in case you don't want to sit there and watch the full half-hour thing. That was highly requested for the past couple years, and so I decided to chop it up a little bit, because why not create little bite-sized clips so you could just eat them like little cupcakes instead of eating the whole cake. But I like eating whole cakes. Thank you so much for watching. We'll do NFL Week 1 predictions tomorrow. I'm Tom Grossi. And as always, go Pack Go.